what you do matters, and there are wins happening in your ministry that might be small, but they're worth celebrating. And you need to give yourself permission to celebrate what you're doing well. And if you don't regularly do that, and if you don't have someone in your life that can do that with you, who's not in your ministry, who's not one of your leaders, I mean, like, you can hit me up on Instagram. I will be that person. I will gas you up. Okay. But like, you need someone outside that's encouraging you, because there are a few jobs that are more discouraging than doing what we're doing. And if you want to last 17 years, you have to have people who are telling you that when you can't see it in yourself.
I did think it would be fun to start with some rapid fire get to know you questions.
Boom.
First off, just want to say, Sean, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited to get under the hood of what God's doing in your life and your ministry. And you're kind of a vet at this point. You know, we've got some reps under your belt and a lot of wisdom that comes with that. But happy to have you here, man.
Dude, thanks for having me, Ryan. I'm honestly, this is on me. This has been a long time coming, and you've been very gracious to me as I've failed to put something on your calendar, but here I am. But I've been very excited to talk to you. So
yes, well, same. Okay, I do want to get to know you a little bit more deeply and share some of these insights. You live in Denver, is this correct?
Yep.
Or at least Denver Metro?
Yep.
Awesome. Favorite Denver food spot?
So you prepared me with this, and I was like going back and forth. I'd probably
decide.
say, okay, there's a spot in Denver called Linger, and it's not even for, like, the food is good, but I love the environment of it. It's a very unique restaurant. It used to be a mortuary, and then they turned it into a restaurant. I know, hear me out. It's really good. And they have all of these different small dishes from, like, different, so they have some, like, some Asian dishes, some, like, they have a little, like, slider, like little burgers and stuff. So you can just get a bunch of different types of food, and it's in my favorite area of Denver, and it's next to my favorite ice cream spot. So it's just like a good spot to go.
The total package. Yeah, I couldn't decide. Like, if people ask me that in Kansas City, I'm like, I don't know. There's a lot of good food here. People always think barbecue, but I'm like, there's a lot of other good stuff too. I want to know weirdest hobby. Like, what is, like, the thing? Like, maybe, like, the hobby you're like, you almost don't want other people to know you're really into. It tells us a lot about you.
I'll give you two. One of them is I play a video game called League of Legends, which is very nerdy. I got into it. A bunch of my old college students and leaders at the first church I worked at were super into it. And I've initially got into it because they would just come over to my house. You kind of have like a LAN party in my living room. And then there was one time they weren't around, and I was like, I kind of want to play it by myself. And so that's one of them. And I still play with some of those old students of mine. But the second thing is, so what people maybe don't know about me, I get really hyper fixated on, like, a topic or, like, an issue, and I just love researching stuff. So
Same.
one of my majors in college was philosophy, and I love thinking through, like, philosophical concepts and doing a deep dive on existentialism, or I love talking about, like, modern philosophy back in, like, the Descartes, Leibniz era. And then recently since like 2009, I've been really worried about AI. Yeah. And so now it's like we're living in a nightmare. And so I love researching things that don't have anything to do with student ministry, but are just fun to learn about. Which
but really all that stuff's probably really relevant. And I'm sure that's made a huge impact on your preaching, and how you're, like, looking at the, text through the cultural, that cultural exegesis is impacting kind of the text exegesis stuff. And, like, how do you bridge that gap? It's probably why you're a really
That's how
awesome
I justify
next gen communicator too. Just, okay, there's all these things going on, and this is how people think, and this is why we think this way. That's super fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those are my
interesting.
Hobbies.
Man, League of Legends. Can't say I'm a major player. I did have a roommate in college, though, for one semester, who was a Chinese exchange student. Weirdest dude.
He's probably really good.
He was amazing. All he would do all day long, he like only wore flip-flops. He had like 2 outfits. He would never brush his teeth, smoked cigarettes all day long, and just cranked this giant thermos of green tea and would just grind League of Legends every single day.
This guy sounds like my hero.
His American name was Solomon.
So let's
and
go,
he was a great guy, but he did steal my headphones when he moved out. And I saw him on campus like 2 years later, and I was like, Solomon, those are my headphones. I didn't say. I should have. That's like one of my college regrets is not calling him out on the headphones. But he's a good dude.
Hey,
he's
maybe
a great
he's listening
guy.
right now. Solomon, this is your chance. Give the headphones back. Ryan still thinks about him.
Come on, man. Give me those Shure over-the-ear, really nice, expensive studio monitors back. That would be great. They do happen to be the exact same headphones I'm wearing right now.
Nice.
Okay, best purchase you've made in the last 12 months.
I just bought a car yesterday.
Whoa.
Yeah. I bought a Tesla Model Y.
Let's go.
And I'm very excited about it. And I've been driving it nonstop the last 24 hours.
You just said you're freaked out by AI. You're just feeding it all of your information now. Yep. You're just giving you're giving Gronk your info.
Hey, here's the thing. AI will cure cancer, but then possibly kill all of us. There's no stopping it. Might as well enjoy the fruits of its labor, you know?
Yeah, I've got this really techie 7th grader that is on our sound team, and he was wearing an Unreal Engine t-shirt. If that tells you anything about him, any gamers out there or AI generators, super just like into coding, all this stuff. And I walked up to him. I said, Oliver, are you the first sentient AI being? Are you powered by Unreal Engine? I'm just saying, like, and he leans into me. I will never forget this. He just looks at me and goes, how did you know? I'm like, this kid's 12, dude. Like, he was just rolling with it completely. So, but anyway, awesome. I did have a chat with some students the other night. I was like, guys, I'm kind of excited about AI taking over. Like, I just want to freaking just Gatling gun like an AI robot and just like, that's going to be sick one day when we have to fight it.
I don't know if it'll be sick, and I don't know if we win that. Okay. But yeah, we can be excited about it for sure.
Great. Okay, Tesla, last vacation you went on that you were really stoked about?
My wife and I just celebrated our 10-year wedding anniversary back in
Congrats.
May, and we went to, thanks, man. We went to Japan for 2 weeks.
Oh.
We've literally been like dreaming about and saving up for this trip since we got married. And we went to Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka, and it's the most incredible place I've ever been in my life. It was like a life-changing experience for me. It was incredible.
Amazing. That's so good. Yeah, I got one of my old students. He's about to graduate from a university kind of by me, Kansas State. Go Wildcats. Nice. Alma mater. But he is really serious about doing like a missional community and like opening up a cafe and like moving to Japan. And I'm like, I'm sure he's thinking the same thing. I was like, yeah, what an awesome place to put roots down. It's on my wife and I's bucket list for sure.
Oh man, because of my wife's work, she gets a lot of jobs in Europe, and so I've been able to like piggyback and just carry bags for her when she works and stuff. And so I've been to a lot of places in Europe, and Europe's great. You know, nothing compares to Japan. Not even close. Like I'd be fine never going to Europe again, so I could go back to Japan. Like it literally. And I'll say this too. So less than 1% of the population is Christian, and I went into Osaka. And there was this really cool knife shop because we wanted to get like a cool cooking knife with like Japanese steel and, you know, and I'm talking to the guy, and at the end of the conversation, he was super nice to me. At the very end, they let you engrave your knife.
Oh,
and I was
cool.
like, oh, can I get Lord for my last name, you know? And he goes, oh, are you a Christian? And I was like, oh, yes, but that's not why I want Lord on the blade. Like I was trying to explain to him, he didn't have like the best English. And so he was trying to follow me, and I'm like, no, I'm a Christian. And then finally I'm like, I'm actually a pastor. And he was like, oh, what? And he goes, I've never met a pastor.
Wow.
He became a Christian 6 months ago, or 6 months before I met him. And he tells me like his whole life story in like 30 seconds as I'm like checking out.
Oh my gosh.
And what I can best understand is his best friend had a roommate who was a foreign exchange student from America who was living with him and basically presented the gospel to him.
Wow.
Just like first week. And then they started watching Life Church messages together. And then that friend went back to America, but his best friend still invites all of his friends over to watch church services.
Wow.
And so this guy had become a Christian. He never met a pastor before. Like it was incredible. And he was asking me like, oh, do you know the song Oceans? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, oh, I cry every time I hear it. It was like one of my favorite experiences being in Japan. And I'm like kicking myself for not getting his contact info. Like it was at the very end, and he's like working with other people. I didn't know what to do. And we walked out, and I'm like, I just made a huge mistake. I should have gotten this guy's number.
You could probably look him up, call him, or find somebody.
I've been emailing.
Yeah.
I've been emailing with them trying to find, and they like won't give me info. So
yeah.
But because you're wearing a Move shirt, Lane Moss, who oversees Move,
Shout
told
out
him about
CIY.
it. His best friend is a missionary in Osaka. And so he's been going to the knife shop trying to find him.
Amazing.
So full circle.
Dude, you just sparked revival by buying like a really fancy knife. I love
we'll
that.
See.
That's
also,
amazing.
that really fancy knife was like $80. It's like the nicest knife you've ever felt. It was $80.
Wow. I love that. That's your second best purchase of the last year.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Are you a sports guy? Sports fan?
I am, but I'm not from Denver. So I'm not I love the Avalanche, but I'm a Ducks fan.
Okay.
So hockey's the sport I watch the most. What's the name of Kansas City's hockey team again?
Non-existent, minor league. The Independence. I'm trying to think. The Mavericks. Yeah. No, we only have minor league. No NHL. That's sad.
Yeah, it is sad.
Too much money going to football.
Ducks, Angels, and Rams, and Lakers.
There you go. Yeah, because you're an LA guy. I was going to trash a little Denver sports, but I forgot. I was like, oh, that's right.
I saw that.
You're a California guy.
People here are very upset about their baseball team and their football team. Because we have a phenomenal basketball team, one of the best hockey teams. So.
That's okay. This is just to transition a little more into youth ministry. I want to hear maybe the most ridiculous youth ministry moment or story that you can recollect. I've got scores.
I know. It's like, do I go the injury route? Do I go just like the audacity of some students, I'm trying to think of one that like it really involves me, not just I was loosely associated with it. I'll just say the most memorable for me was my first summer camp as a small group leader. I've been a leader for a month. I don't know what I'm doing. Our youth pastor was so clear, do not do any wrestling in your cabin. And I was doing MMA at the time. So I was like, too bad, we're going to do it. And so I was doing like a seminar, showing them like some jiu-jitsu stuff.
Yeah.
And we have these students wrestling. It was like the best bonding experience. Like, and at the very end, we have like probably 20 different matches. No one gets hurt. Last match of the night, one of our seniors goes against one of our freshmen, tackles him off we had all the bed mattresses, on the ground.
Yeah.
He takes him down right off the mattresses. So just on like the thinnest concrete you've ever seen, breaks the kid's shoulder. Just breaks it. And it so it's dislocated and broken. And this kid starts like throwing up. He's like screaming. He played guitar and he's like, can I never play guitar again? He's like screaming. And it was one of the worst moments for me, like watching this. And I had to go wake up my youth pastor and tell him. And it was not in a great mountain town. So going to that hospital was super sketchy. But that was pretty ridiculous.
Brutal. Yeah, our last winter retreat is at this like real jank camp. And like classic fight night happens every camp, like every retreat, like anybody listening's like, of course. And like back to back, like in the same like 10-minute span, like kids were like ding dong ditching each other and like just like donkey kicked in one of the girls' dorm, like just broke the entire door off the frame. And then I go back, I'm chewing them out for that. And I go back in and then there's this massive hole in the wall. There's just like this ridiculous hole in the drywall. I'm like, and then I go up to find my leaders. I'm like, what the freaking heck happened in the basement? And then one of my volunteers is like, well, I picked Tristan up and then he was in the wall. I'm like, you threw a kid in the wall? And then I looked at like two of my other leaders who were like 40s, like in like 40, like one of them was almost 50, used to be a youth pastor. I'm like, what are you doing? Where were you? I was just like, I went full dad mode, like not even really on the kids. It was more on the leaders. I was like,
100%.
It was just a full systemic failure of leadership on my part. So,
well, students don't know.
Yeah, they're fine. And they had a blast. Yeah. And Tristan had a great time getting his body slammed through the wall. So no hospitalization there, but we've got many other stories. And on stories, you've been in ministry for more than a couple minutes.
Yep.
And I'm just curious, like how many total years of ministry do you have under your belt, but kind of between like volunteering, part-time, full-time?
17.
Yeah, 17. So you're coming on this almost 20.
Yep.
Like why do you still do this?
It's never gotten old to me. I think that I think for a lot of youth pastors I know, they're in youth ministry because when they were in high school, when they were in middle school, there was an adult who cared about them and it changed their life, And I think for me, I was an atheist all through high school and I grew up in the church, but I was just a really angry kid. I had a lot of addiction in my home and stuff. And so I was that student that would argue with my youth pastor, like every week that I could. There's like, I still know my old youth pastor. He's the lead pastor of the church I grew up at. And I was talking to him about this a couple months ago. And there was a night at camp where I even, he came up to me, knew that I didn't believe in God anymore, knew that I was going on this rabbit trail of like atheism and finding all these like arguments and stuff. And takes me in the malt shop, spends like an hour and a half with me talking about all my questions, everything. At the end of it, I was like, you didn't answer my questions. I want to go home. Like I was that kid. But they never gave up on me. They continued to pour into me. I'm still friends with my leaders. And then ultimately when I gave my life to Christ when I was 21, I went back to that church that always cared about me. And so I think that's like my why of why I'm in ministry has never changed. Like I was deeply impacted by it. And I think that, I love working with students, but I also, especially in the last like 5 years, especially post-COVID, there are so many problems to be solved when it comes to discipling students and partnering with parents and discipling their kids. With technology advancing, their generation is changing so fast. I mean, we know all the stats of, and so I think there's always been a problem to solve. And so I think because I have that curiosity and want to like research things and like get to the bottom of things, there's a never-ending problem when it comes to student ministry. There's always something else you can be doing, and that really excites me.
Yeah. Hey, real quick, I just want to say thank you so much for listening and watching this podcast, wherever it is, on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're watching this. And I just want to ask a big personal ask of you. And that is, one, if you are watching this and you're not subscribed, to please hit the subscribe button so that you can stay up to date on upcoming content coming your way, resources, videos, trainings, all those things. It does our show a huge service if you like the episode, if you subscribe, and please, if this is helpful for you, share it with a friend, someone in ministry, another youth leader, another youth pastor. That's how we grow this in order to impact and encourage more leaders in ministry. Thank you.
And now I think being a veteran, as you'd say, like the thing I love most now is developing leaders. Like I still love having conversations with students, and like at camp is kind of my moment where I get to spend a lot of time with students. But throughout the year, I'm mainly talking with leaders, talking with my student pastors that I oversee. And I love being able to develop them and help them grow.
Yeah. What does it look like for you right now?
What?
Developing leaders. What does that process look like for you? And how do you tackle that? Not problem, but that challenge that's never ending of leadership development.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think it comes in a lot of ways. So I think for the team of student pastors that I work with, obviously, I have regular one-on-ones with them and stuff. The way that I structure our one-on-ones is I usually, unless there's something happening that we need to talk about, I always ask my student pastors 3 questions. How are you? How's the ministry doing? How can I help? And sometimes, I think I stole that from Justin, by the way, so I can't take credit for that. But sometimes, like leading my team, especially for the ones that are, in their mid to late 20s and they're newer in ministry and stuff, being able to walk through some of the best leadership development for them is how to balance work-life balance, how to help with their family, how to help with, I have some young dads on my team. I think that that's something like I'm going to spend time on that might not be ministry related, but how you're showing up in your home is going to affect how you're showing up at work. And so like, I don't pry myself into their life, but I definitely offer that. And then also when it comes to, so I think just practically walking through their ministry. So like right now I'm having all these meetings with my student pastors and our campus pastors at our, multi-site churches. And we're talking through, hey, this is what you did last year. These are some of the biggest wins from last year. Here's the biggest growth areas. So talking very specifically about the areas that they can grow in. And then I try to meet with leaders at each of the campuses just to kind of get a gauge on stuff, but also learn from them, see what they're seeing, things like that. But I guess overall, just being involved in their life and knowing who they are and knowing where their strengths are, knowing where their weaknesses are and opportunities for growth, and speaking into those things.
Yeah.
Is that too simple of an answer?
No, I think that's great. And I think it shows you got a pastor's heart as a leader,
Yeah.
and it's so easy. I don't know if you ever struggle with this. I think that there's times when I notice I'm getting unhealthy. I'm like, go, 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 drive, 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 like like process, like, hey, this is what's not working. And I forget, I'm like, gosh, like our volunteers are just people, like they're just people that need to be shepherded and cared for. And there's stuff going on in their life. And, um, I'm not really doing my job if I'm not asking, like, hey, how are you? Like you said, like, how are you?
Mm-hmm.
How's your small group going? How's your ministry? Or if you're working with your staff, like, just that balance of, kind of even in like the coaching space that I've been learning a little bit about is this balance between, with ontological, fancy word coaching is like goal line and soul line. That like if you're going to really be successful with helping people, it's going to be a balance of both of those. Like, hey, yeah, we have goals and we have things we're trying to do, but how's your soul? And if your soul's not healthy, then you're not going to be a healthy leader enough to ever really accomplish your goals because, or if you do, it'll be coming from a place of unhealth, and it's only a matter of time, before burnout sets in and you just get frustrated or sin starts to creep in. And I don't know if that resonates with you or if you've ever seen that over the years in your ministry, but.
Yeah. What's interesting, I haven't heard someone use the term ontological. It's like the study of being. So it's like a lot of ontological philosophies around like the being of like who God is, like the character of God. Yeah, I think you said something really interesting to me. Like when you're talking about like especially like frustration with leaders, if like, hey, like if they're not meeting expectations or they're not like those harder conversations with leaders, I think if you have enough relational chips to where they know you care about them, that gives, so you shouldn't, okay, caring about their personal life, I don't want it to be a means to an end. Like I don't want it to be like, let me just make you think that I like you or like care about your life so that I can get what I want out of you. And I know that's not your heart, but I've there's one
worked for people like that, and I've got people in my life who talk to me that way, and you smell that a million miles away. You're just like it's like it's like a used car salesman. Like
and they're like, so how are you doing? And they're like not looking at you, and you're like, what? Do you actually care? But I think that at the end of the day, I think every leader that you have wants to be doing what they're doing well. Like what person shows up because they're like, you know what I want to do today? I want to give up my time so I can show up to this thing and not do it well. And then have people think that I'm not doing a good job. Like what person on earth would want to do that? Every single leader you have wants to do well. They sometimes just don't know what well looks like for them. And I think that you have to be, I think the best leaders are ones that are able to understand the context that their leaders are showing up in and know what their next win could be. Because we have some leaders who we're literally having to tell them to stop going to so many students' games because it's like, or stop spending money on so much food with their students. Like we have to almost pull them back a little bit, which I'd rather have that problem, right? But like you have to know where your leader is at and like, man, this is a huge win for you if you're just to make one additional connection a week. Or like maybe it's just shooting a couple more text messages for them. And then the other side of that for them to then feel the fruit of them growing in their leadership and making a larger impact on their students' lives, which that's why they're giving up time to do it. And so I think we have a responsibility to help them see that. But again, they're not going to hear us unless we actually care about who they are. It's the line that I'm sure every youth pastor has used of like, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? I think we have to live by that.
I think the longer that I've been doing this too, like I'm learning the balance of, okay, here's your SOP or here's your job description or here's the 5 things or checklist or here's what winning looks like. And I think making that well defined is critical. Like if you're, if you're not doing that, then that's a great place to start. Just saying, hey, define the win. I've learned a lot about that from, you and Justin's podcast. That F5, F4 checklist thing that you guys have shared before. I stole that, retooled it, and it's been very, very helpful. But I've also learned that there's a sweet balance of understanding that God brings people onto your team that have a specific role and bring a specific culture add. While they may not be doing all of those things all the time, that God's got them there for a specific purpose that's really unique to them. So how have you balanced that when you're working with your pastors and you're working with volunteers over the years? identifying and seeing gifts and calling that out in them to help maximize their impact and their role on the team that may not divert from the checklist and the core things, but be an amazing addition to that. How do you do that as a leader?
Yeah, it's just a couple of things. That's a great question. There's a couple of things. I think some things you need to ask them and some things you need to tell them. I think that, so there's some people on my team. So I'll speak for my student pastors right now, because that's mainly, those are my leaders right now, just, overseeing a multi-site ministry. I have a team of 8 that I oversee. And so each of them, everyone on my team, I mean, I'm not just saying this like to say it. I love my team because of how diverse my team is. Like their skill sets are so different, and every single one of them brings such a unique gift to what we do. And some of them realize that. And so I can like ask them, like, what are some things that my boss has this thing where if like you look at one of those plates, you get like a potluck or something where it's like the large main dish and then like the 2 side dishes. And if you're smart, you do like, your main food in the main dish, you get a side, and then you have like your dessert in one of them, right? He has this illustration where he's like, every leader should have an awareness of what their main job responsibility is, like their main dish. Like this is like mainly what my job is about. It's like leadership development, it's teaching, vision casting, training out my leaders, things like that. But then there's these side things, and usually the side things are like vegetables that you don't really like, but you feel obligated to have, right? And those are the things you're not super excited about. But what balances out is like, what's the one dessert in your job? What's the thing that will benefit your role, but it's not in your job description? But you want, whether it's something you want to grow in, whether it's something that you're just really passionate about and want to do, and helping my team identify that. And sometimes it's been as simple as just asking them, like, what do you think that is? But some people on my team, I think, don't fully understand the gifts that they have, and they don't even see the blessing they are to people in certain areas of their life, And so, like, I have people on my team that are like phenomenal communicators, and I'm like, hey, that's your, and you enjoyed, and they enjoy doing it. It's like, we need to double down on that. Like, yeah, it's going to benefit your job, but let's spend some like serious hours on this because you have something really passionate about this. One of the guys on my team, we're starting campus clubs this semester. And one of the guys on my team, he comes from the nonprofit world, used to do a lot of work with homeless people and stuff. And so he's super passionate about this. So this was like he kind of volunteered that of like, hey, like I'm really good at this. Like I'm really passionate about this. And he's probably going to be leading the charge for a lot of our on-campus ministries and stuff. And so what I'd say too is for each of my campuses, what they're doing with their leaders right now is, I heard on a Craig Rochelle podcast forever ago that when you're thinking about the needs of your ministry, a lot of times if you're like me, and I'm sure you do this, Ryan, because you're way more organized than I am, and I think strategic, but a lot of times we dream up like what an org chart would look like, including all these higher level like volunteer roles. And the problem with that is we're trying to shove people into roles that we think are necessary. And you can do that. And I think sometimes you can get away with that. But Craig suggested that you should do the opposite. You should identify what the strengths of your leaders are and then build roles, build your org chart around them.
Yeah.
So like identifying like, for example, one of our campuses, they have one of our leaders there. She loves teaching art. And it's like, that's not on my org chart to have like an art teacher, you're right. But we lean into it. And it's like, and the student pastor there, Chris, he leaned into it. And like, she will integrate that into her small group time. She'll integrate that even if students want to learn how to draw something later. And it's like been this thing that like has been really special to a lot of the high school girls. And he's grown a ton in their high school girls. And I think that's a big piece of it. Like there's little things like that. And I think that like, what a beautiful thing to not even realize that your gifts could benefit the kingdom in a ministry. Right. And so I think that's really important. There's certain roles you have to have, like you have to have small group leaders, right? But dream about like, hey, maybe you have, we have a leader who helps out with our once a month events that we call rallies. And I had this leader who him and his wife were serving on the setup team, doing stuff like that. And as I'm talking to him, he's an executive coach. And I was like, hey, would you just meet with me once a month and just pour into me? And now he gets to use his gifts to help me. And he's serving our ministry because he's helping me develop as a leader. But again, that wasn't on my org chart. But I lean into the giftings of my leaders. And I think that it's going to look different, I think, for every single youth pastor given their leaders. But you said this earlier, like I think all of those leaders that you have are there for a purpose.
Yeah.
And so I think it's our role to pull that gold out of them.
What's been something that you've discovered about yourself over the years that was maybe outside of your job description, your main entree, that maybe somebody spoke into you that you discovered, oh my gosh, like I've got this gold mine of a gift that you mentioned earlier? You said extracting gold. Like, I'm just curious in your story, in your past, something that God really illuminated, maybe in the process, that you've been able to really find a lot of joy from in ministry, that you've been able to see a lot of impact in. Because I think that a lot of people in full-time ministry get so bogged down with, I have to do this, and this is the they just get buried under the grind, and they forget like the joy of using their gifts in just the most natural way. So just curious if you have anything that you can think of in your own life that you've discovered a passion for that you maybe never even knew was there until you were doing it for a while.
Maybe this is too basic. Being a student pastor. I mean, like, so back it up even more. Like, I was not the kid that people were telling from the time they were 14, like, you're a leader, bro. You have influence. That was not me. I was the kid, like, I had leadership, but I wasn't leading people well, right? I was influencing the people around me. And so it took me 4 years to accept that I think God was calling me to be a student pastor, because I just didn't believe it in myself. And so I think that's just the most basic, foundational one of, like, I didn't think I'd be a good student pastor. And I think I had a lot of imposter syndrome when I first started, of like, I don't know if I can actually do this. And then once I started doing it, then I had people calling those things out of me. I kept saying, I felt like that little kid that, comes home from school one day and they learned about all these possible jobs. And I'm this kid that came home and said, I want to be an astronaut. And it's like, it felt like everyone knew that I couldn't, but like, I don't want to squash his dream. I felt like that going into student ministry. And so I think the second one is what I said earlier. I love being curious about things. And so oftentimes when I'm thinking about our ministry, what students are struggling with, when you're talking about kind of like the cultural context that our students are living in, that's framing everything about them. Man, I love researching why. Even if I'll never use it in my message, even if like I'll go on this deep dive that's in like the scholastic world to where it's not even, I'm not really pulling things to pull my message. I do think it forms me though as a person. Like, it changes my filter by what and how I view the world. And so I think me always being curious about how things work and how things are changing has been my dessert that I think has really benefited my ministry to help us, I think, do ministry in a new way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that even going back to what we were talking earlier, like the idea of what you do flows out of who you are. The being leads to the doing in a really powerful way. And the more you can feed those things that are really natural to you, and that it is going to spill out in your ministry, which is really exciting that God made 100%. Us that way. You mentioned you lead a team of 8.
Yep.
Not volunteers, like a lot of people maybe listening, but 8 student pastors that are all leading hundreds of volunteers across everything that you do. I know Flatirons is a big church. Tell us a little bit about your mission, your vision, and I just love to get under the hood for a few minutes. What's God doing in your church, and tell us a little bit about what's going on there.
Yeah, so I could talk for a while about this. I'll try to be concise. So, the vision of our church is like to bring the awesome life of Christ to people in a lost and broken world. And there are a lot of churches. It's like, this isn't just Flatiron students, but Flatiron's church in general. There are a lot of churches out there that will say things like, everyone's welcome here. I've never actually seen a church like Flatiron's that actually means it. Like my first weekend when I came to interview, I'm backstage. I got to hang out with the lead pastor a little bit. Our lead pastor, he was a high school pastor at a large church in Kentucky for over 20 years, and like just a veteran in student ministry. And what he'll say is like, yeah, I'm just doing student ministry for adults now. That's basically what he'd say he does. And service starts, and I'm kind of hanging out in the back, and one of the guys working on the production team holding a camera, his name is also Sean, was back there. I started talking to him. Find out Sean was homeless a couple of years ago, was living behind this church. And it was only because it was really cold that he decided to come in and hear about it, gave his life to Christ, and his life was like radically transformed.
Wow.
And he still had to do things that I think are still trying to, grow in parts of his life and stuff. But these like crazy experiences of people who were so far from God, who you would think would never step foot in a church, like weekly, I'm meeting them and hearing their stories. And so I think what I love about that, and that was the biggest reason that drew me to Flatirons, is because I didn't want to leave California. I wanted to stay there. Our ministry was growing, it was thriving, it was doing great. But man, like I've never seen a church like Flatirons that actually cares about people in a lost and broken world. And even at camp this past summer, after the first night, we were so bad that the president of YMCA called me into his office. Like I called to the principal's office, and I'm in there with Lane from CIY, and we're just getting reamed for. They got so many emails. Like our students were just yelling things at other guests that were staying there, and like all this stuff. And I just was like, "Hey, man, like the president's name is Shannon." And I started talking about the DNA of our church, because he basically was like, we have a ton of church groups that come in here. We've never had problems like this. You know, what's going on? I'm like, well, these aren't church kids. These aren't kids who understand church. Most of their families who come to Flatirons are very new to the faith, and they don't know what discipleship even means for them. And they're just starting to learn what that means. And I start talking about, we had students that came that they had friends that had just gotten shot in the past year. Wow. And I mean, coming with some serious like trauma. And I watched this president of, one of the largest YMCAs in the country. I just watched his shoulders drop, and he just looked at me and he's like, you know what? That's who we want to impact too. Like, I didn't know that. Like, thank you for telling me. And that guy became like one of our biggest fans. And so I'd say overall, we're a church for people who don't know how to church, who maybe never saw themselves in a church before. And I think those are the people that I feel most called to minister to. And so I feel most at home at Flatirons, I think, because of that.
And that's hard. We've been working with our team a lot. We've had a really great couple of years of pretty rapid growth at my campus with our student ministry, which has been a blast. And, God's been doing some really, really cool things, but it's gotten really rough at times. And I feel like we had the same conversation with some of our hardcore old school, like, well, this wasn't, kids are so disrespectful and they're not honoring the word, and they're all these things. And I'm like, I know. And I've had to have the same conversation over and over. I'm like, hey, that kid is not saved. They are not filled with the Holy Spirit. They have no understanding of what worship is and who God is and what his presence is. Like, we've got to just, and I was like, that's why we have to share the gospel with these kids, because until that happens, they're never going to live the life that God has for them. They're never going to behave the way that they should in church. And I think it's just, to me, as well as with you, I think that's the sign of a healthy church. If we're 100%. If we're living on mission, if we're reaching the lost, it's going to get really messy, and kids are going to be, getting in fights, and they're going to be doing stuff they shouldn't be doing, and they're going to be rowdy, and they're going to be crazy. I mean, of course, it's going to happen with any kid, because they're kids. But we're sinful people. But I kind of have a little just joy rise in my heart whenever we have a situation like that, just because while they are a pain in the butt, it's also a sign that, like, man, we're getting students here that need the gospel. And I'm sure we could share stories of kids and their lives, and for the rest of the day, of what's happening there. But would love to hear from you a little bit. A little two-part question.
Yeah. Stuff
that's working that you're like, man, we are doing this. We've really focused on these initiatives. God's really moving in amazing ways. And maybe some things that aren't working that you're kind of problem solving on right now. So.
Yeah. Well, before I do that, can I just comment on, so I guess one of the beautiful things is that conversation you're having to have with leaders about being frustrated with, whatever. We have a couple of those, but because the DNA of our church is like that, it's been crazy to me how little I have to have that conversation, awesome. Which is really cool. Like, the amount of times I'll have leaders initiate with me, like, oh my gosh, I had 2 students, I found them vaping outside and blah, blah. And they're not complaining. They're telling me because they're like, thank God they're here.
Yeah.
And like that's the heartbeat. So I'm so thankful for that. But when I don't have those leaders, the 2 things I hit them with are, while we're still sinners, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us, right? What does that mean? That means right now, God still has a life for them, and God still cares and values these students. While you were a sinner, Christ died for you, right?
Yeah.
And the second thing is, a lot of the times, I help them separate what's biblical and what's cultural. is because a lot of those things you're saying, like, well, they're so irreverent to scripture. And you're like, okay, let's back up, and like, let's look at, and a lot of these things, not cultural, like American cultural, but just like, that's probably the cultural context in which you grew up when you were, and usually it's when they were a student, they were like commanded to fold their hands, to sit in a certain way, right? And it's like, that's actually not a biblical thing. That's more of a cultural thing, which is, I think, still valuable, but it's healthy to understand those two things. We can still shoot for, things that you think would be beneficial culturally, but I'm also not going to yell at a student for that just because that's more of a preference. Does that make sense?
Oh, of course. Of course.
But some things that are going well, I think, I mean, this is such a basic answer, but so when I first got here 2.5 years ago, we didn't have like a multi-site strategy. We didn't really have a clear plan on how we'd engage, how we just do ministry with them as a multi-site. Every campus kind of did something different. They met different days, different times. They called themselves different things. They did different series. And so I had to kind of come in and like unify all of our campuses together. We onboarded 180 new leaders across campuses my first month here, which is crazy.
First
and by
month?
we, yeah.
Oh.
And by we, I mean, this was all the team. Like this is me just providing oversight, but like they deserve the credit for how much onboarding they did that first month.
Holy smokes.
So, and we launched with a very small group focused model that relied on leaders. If you're going to go if you're going to grow large by growing small, it rises and falls on the strength of your leaders. And so there's a good and a bad to that. I think long term, I think it is the best scenario, but short term, it's really hard. And it's having a lot of conversations. It's having conversations with leaders. Like, we'll walk by a small group and there's a leader leading his group, but he's given another message. And you have all the students are kind of sitting on the ground lined up and he's standing over them, teaching them or whatever. It's a million of those conversations over and over again. It's, the whole vision leaks. You're having to repeat yourself over and over again. A line that this is maybe a couple months in, I found myself saying this, and I found people on my team saying this a lot, is the line that now irks me is, now I'm blanking on it. Oh my gosh. Oh, I shouldn't have to do this, or I shouldn't have to say this. I shouldn't have to. That's a bad leader. If you find yourself saying a lot, I shouldn't have to say this to them. I shouldn't have to do this. If you want to be a good leader, all the things you probably have to do.
Always.
And there's nothing too small for you to have to do. And so whether I shouldn't have to say this again, I shouldn't have to go over there and do this thing. Great. You don't have to, but if you want a good ministry, you need to. And
it's like we shouldn't have to take communion all the time, but we do. And God knows
absolutely.
it, because we shouldn't have to remember the gospel all the time, but we do. And we shouldn't have to repent all the time, but we do. And it's like, come on, guys.
Hey, to be that guy, God didn't have to come down to earth and save humanity, right?
But he did.
But he chose to. And so I think that's a big thing. But what we're doing well, I think, is we're now experiencing the fruit of developing our leaders. And so we're seeing our leaders grow in their capacity. We're seeing the engagement increase. This is a crazy stat that you're not going to believe me on. So my first year here, our attendance was so all over the place. We'd have 1 week where some of our campuses, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm getting close to 100. And then next week they're at 25. Whoa. And we're just all over the place.
That's discouraging if you're leading. I'm sure. And we've all been there. We've all had events that tanked, and nights that there was a ball game and the plague went through school, and you're just like,
what did I do?
They're never coming back.
Yeah. And so I had this theory, and I asked my team to trust me. Hey, this is because they don't know their leaders yet, and they're not known by their leaders yet. And this is something that, like, trust me, we're doing the right call. Let's not abandon ship. Because it was like, maybe we abandon the small group. Maybe we just do higher programming, all this stuff. And it's like, no, guys, we're doing the right thing. So we measured. So now this is our third school year that I've been here. My first year, we measured how many students came to group just one time a month for all 9 months of the school year. And then I measured that the first year, and I measured that the second year.
Okay.
The second year, across all of our campuses, we only had 168 across all of our campuses. How many would you guess we had our first year?
I don't
So
know.
it's lower.
Okay, you went from something lower than 168. I don't know, like
Yeah.
50.
0.
You had no kids that came more than once a month.
Correct.
Wow.
0. We had 2 students who came 8 out of the 9 months, just one time in one of those months. So like you think of the consistency. And so a lot of our growth that we've experienced is just consistency of our students. We're getting new students still because friends want to bring their friends to something that they're excited about that's changing them. But also students are now willing to sacrifice more to be there.
Yeah.
And so like that was a crazy stat that I shared with our like executive team. And they're like, that's not true. And luckily our like systems data guy that's on staff, he's one of our leaders. And so so he made sure, he's like, I manually checked. It wasn't there. And so I think the thing that we're succeeding the most in is, our leaders.
Which shows, I've got this like coaching tool that's like this bottleneck framework, which is just like a ministry funnel, and just asks you kind of questions of looking at like, hey, where do you have problems? Is it a top of the funnel, middle, lower middle, bottom? Thinking through like first time guests to, having a culture where students enjoy to come, but just to consume, and then, so I'm like, you're immediately walking into a situation coming in where you're like, we have like 0 middle of the funnel activity happening. We getting kids here and they're just dropping, and we get, so that I'm curious for you as a leader, how did you address that, quickly, and getting more into the specifics? I'd love to hear, how did you develop your leaders? What conversations were you having, and how did you clarify that at scale across 8 campuses, or how many campuses you guys have?
We have 5 campuses.
Across 5 campuses. That's a huge job.
Mm-hmm.
What did that look like for you?
So the unique context of this is the team of student pastors that I oversee. I think 3 of them had like good student ministry experience before they came here, but 5 of them didn't. And so like one of our student pastors who's crushing it, his name's Chris. He's in his early 40s, never been in ministry full time before. And literally he was in the medical field for 20 years and came to camp, and I literally watched him interact with a parent over like a disciplinary kind of thing, having to send a kid home. And he had such a pastor's heart. I'm like, dude, you want to be a student pastor? And I gave him a job, and he's been crushing it. But having this green team, a lot of what I've been doing is for our big leader trainings, what I try to do is I'll create the training and I'll actually go through it with our student team, like our student pastors, like I'm giving it to them, and I make like a PowerPoint with it, things like that. And so I want to train them, but then give them a couple weeks to kind of absorb it. And then they actually do that with their leaders. So I train them on it, and then I give them the content, and they turn around and they actually go and train the leaders after that.
Yeah, cool. So that's something that centrally you're putting together, and saying, guys, we've all got to get on the same page about this. And then saying, hey, now you guys got to go be trainers and multiply this out.
Yeah, but I don't know. I still think that most leadership development isn't happening in those trainings. I think trainings are important. This is where I don't want to say something I don't mean, but I think those are so much less effective than you giving direct feedback about what you're seeing from your leaders. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I think it's the difference between training and coaching. Like I've got this, that's why I think coaching's got a bad rap sometimes. But like, what is it? It's live, in the moment feedback. Or, hey, you just did this. Let's debrief it. Now let's adjust and evaluate. And like coaching is a skill. Like coaching-based leadership is hard, but it's where breakthrough happens, because it's, you're like, hey, how did that go? Like, how does that compare to what we want? And then having those insights come out. And I think that that's such a critical skill, when you're working on the leadership development. It's like, hey, we covered this, we did the training, we're good. Versus, to your point, I'm like, man, the conversations that I have on a 30-minute phone call of just asking a few really pointed questions, the changes that you see is worlds difference from the training that they forgot half of, that they're going to get every 6 months.
And I think a big part of it, honestly, is, and I don't mean this in like I'm not taking a shot at some of our leaders, but like, I think it's a lack of self-awareness, because it's the amount of times that we'll have a training, and every youth pastor probably does this. Like, there's certain things you're writing for one leader. Like there's like, I actually, I shouldn't have to say this in my leader training, but Billy, I really need Billy to hear this. and you do it and you're looking straight at Billy, and Billy's just
preaching sermon 2.0.
Yeah, 100%. And you're looking at him and he doesn't realize it's him.
No.
And okay, so a training isn't going to fix that. I need to have a way more effective strategy would be to have the conversation with him offline and say, hey dude, you know this part that I talked about this? You're the person that came to mind around that. What? And then giving them the example, which, can I just give this little gem? I stole it from Simon Sinek. Anytime I'm giving someone feedback about something, whether it's they didn't meet expectations or anything like that, it's his 3 Ps. So it's the problem, the pattern, and the prediction. Here's the problem I'm seeing, and you identify the problem, a very specific example of the problem, not just a vague kind of like, you're kind of mean to students. No, hey, remember that one time when you were really short with Steve, and he was just trying to, little Steven was just trying to, play basketball with his friends, but we were supposed to be inside, and I think you could have handled that a little better. Well, then you go to the pattern. I noticed you've actually done that a lot. I know this isn't a one-time thing. This has been something that you do consistently. And then you tell them the prediction. I'm worried if this keeps happening, this is what's going to happen. I am worried if we don't start changing this, you're going to lose trust with your students. It's going to start costing you relational stock with them, like relational chips. And I don't want you to have that, because I know that you love your students, and then you can just kind of vision cast what you see in them. But it's the problem, the pattern, and the prediction. Because I think that, all of them serve a necessary purpose. One, I don't think a lot of them understand the problem or see the problem. They for sure, if they don't see the problem, they definitely don't see that it's a pattern. And usually that means if it's a pattern, it's a part of their character. And so that's a longer thing. It's not just a turn it off thing. It's a like, I want to help you with this. And then the prediction, even if they see those two, they might not see the long-term ramifications, whereas you, the leader, you do. And so I think pointing that out, when I am able to present those 3 things clearly with people, it usually absolves so much of the defensiveness and everything, because they see that I put some thought to it and actually care about them, and I want them to grow as a leader. But
that's so good.
So take that.
Yeah, that's some live feedback and coaching gold right there on working with your teams. And for me, I'm taking notes the whole time. So it sounds like leadership development been crushing. What are some things that are some problems you've been facing in the ministry that you're seeing across your campuses in your youth ministry that are just challenges you're facing, problems you're trying to solve that you're just currently processing? Because I think it's really healthy for people listening to look at a big church like Flatirons, and they get on your social, I liked your post from your event. It looked amazing. But what we didn't see on social is yes, but we're really struggling with this right now. And it's helpful to say we're all in this together and hear how you're thinking through problem solving in your ministry.
Yeah. What you didn't see was one of our students who is on the spectrum. His name's Josh, very sweet kid. Walk up to Noah Heron, who's our speaker. Noah's great. He's an awesome dude. Walks up to him. Noah wrote a book called Holy Habits. It's great. It's really the book was written based off a conversation with a high school student. And so he had asked, would that be beneficial to you to sell those books in the lobby? And we're like, absolutely. We'd love students to have them. This kid walks up to him and says, how dare you sell books in a church, and slaps him. Slaps him very gently, kindly. And also, this is how awesome Noah is. Noah understood the situation, was so kind to him. Like, Noah's the freaking best because of this. But you don't see that on our highlight reel of the night and stuff like that. But in our ministry in general, so you talk about the funnel, we have a really strong middle of the funnel, but we need work at the top and the bottom. So like our rallies that we have once a month, when we first launched them our first year, we saw rapid growth in new students. We've kind of capped. We're barely growing each rally, which I'm not satisfied with, which means I think a big part of it is because the lower part of the funnel isn't strong.
Yep.
Because for the top part of the funnel to be strong, which for us, so our funnel would be like rally would be our big wide open front door for new students to come, really highly programmed, all this stuff in the lobby, food trucks, whatever, easy invite for students. Middle will be our small groups that meet week to week. And then the bottom part of our funnel would be students serving, students taking leadership, like, extra leadership. We have student leadership at most of our campuses. And I think our students, we haven't discipled them well enough to know how to evangelize to their friends.
Yeah.
And we haven't discipled them to know how to do that. And the reason I know that is Noah did this great thing where he, this isn't new to student ministry. You've probably done something like this where, in the room, it's like, hey, I want everyone to close their eyes real quick. Raise your hand if you want to make a larger impact on your campus. And he told the story of his friend Spencer, who this one friend really blew up this like student ministry that he grew up in. And like, I really like kind of took over the city, and so many of their students from their church and in their community got saved through this kid, Spencer. And he goes, how many of you guys feel like Spencer and you want to do that? And they raise their hand. And he goes, you know what? Actually, just stand up right now. And I literally watched this like little middle schooler like nervously raise his hand and like so nervous. He's like, I don't know if I can do this. And then we said, stand up. I watched him like look down and almost like not want to do it, but his eyes are closed. He like stands up. And he's like, open your eyes. He looked around, there's 600 students standing up, and this kid just smiles. And Noah just says, my city had one Spencer. Think about the impact you can make with all of you. Right.
Wow.
And they're all just stoked. I think our students still don't grasp that God could use them now, that God wants to use them to impact their homes, that God wants to use them to impact their families, their sports teams, their friend circles. I don't think they have a picture of it. And I think that's on us. Like, I think we need to do a better job of tapping students on the shoulder, training leaders to do that. So leaders are tapping them on the shoulder, showing that leadership potential in them. And so we're developing a better follow-up strategy for our new students that come to rallies that involve like multiple touch points. Our church as a whole is we just launched this new follow-up strategy. It's just a kind of texting system that's really interesting that helps people. It gets like very detailed information based off who you are, and then only feeds you information that's relevant to you.
Okay, cool.
And so we're going to be starting to develop, like, they can opt into reading plans. They'll get a text each day. They can opt into finding more information about serving, like all these kinds of things. We're kind of doing that in the back end. But that's, I think, the thing that we're struggling the most is our students really taking ownership of the ministry.
Yeah. It's just making me think through some of my time in college. I was a part of a really discipleship focused and evangelism heavy college ministry on my campus. That was phenomenal. I was part of student mobilization at Kansas State University, and still looking back, I'm like, man, what is it? And I think this is true for a lot of college ministries. What they have figured out that a lot of us as high school ministers don't is that they're like, we have a finite 4 to 5 year, 3 for some, 5 for others. And I listened to one of the best trainings, and I listened to a talk that he gave, which reminded me a lot of the college ministry I was a part of, which are kind of partnered ministries, Stumo and Christian Challenge, about being a labor making factory. And like, how do you take a student from lost to laborer in the span of that time? And it's still one of the best talks I've ever listened to. And it was really challenging to me as I've been reflecting, thinking through like a student who's lost, to a student who makes a decision to follow Christ, to a student who's a committed disciple, who's growing and self-feeding, who's engaged with the word, who loves, a student who's serving, to now how do we create that Matthew 9:36 through 38 laborer, that kingdom worker, that the type of person that, like Christ, looks at the crowds with compassion and sees people as lost, as harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd, and are willing to be laborers in his harvest field. Which is, I think, like one of the most foundational vision casting laborer texts that we have in Scripture. When Jesus turns to his disciples, he says, "Hey, pray to the Lord of the harvest to raise up laborers to go out into his harvest field, because the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few." And just that, I've really struggled to know, like, man, how do we build conviction in students before they leave for college, before they leave, while they're still in high school? Like, is it possible to take students from maybe the start of their freshman year, or even earlier? Because I've been blown away by how evangelistic some of our middle school students have been. And I think we lower the bar so far lower for our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, because I've seen God use the testimony and the life and the outreach and the boldness of middle schoolers to reach. Like, we've had some of the most evangelistic growth and the most, we baptized almost 20 middle schoolers in the last month and a half, for a church our size. Has been amazing. And that's almost all been like personal evangelism of students and our small group leaders. And I'm thinking like, man, God is doing something with especially this younger and younger generation. But for me as a leader, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how you're starting to think through like, man, how do we do that? Like, which is really tough to do at scale. Like, how do we help develop students to not just be committed followers of Christ, to be growing themselves, but to have that mindset shift to be, I want to be committed to be a laborer, to go out and take the gospel out into the harvest, which will lead to the invite culture, which will lead to the more guests, which will lead to the growth. But really to say, I have a passion and a burden to make disciples myself and not just take them to a place that will make them for me.
100%. That's so good, man. Will you send me that talk? That sounds incredible.
I will.
Yeah.
I will.
I love that. Yeah. As you're talking, I think about the students that, I'll back up and say, I think sometimes, this is why I tell my team, in every context I've been in, the student that ends up taking leadership and transforming our ministry is never the one I would have chosen, or it's never the one I would have thought. I think that I'm gonna be careful how I say this.
I know what you mean.
You have really good rule followers in your ministry who love Jesus, I'm sure are really strong disciples. And I think sometimes, I'll speak for myself, sometimes I look at that and I'm like, oh, cool. Like they're going to be the ones that are going to transform a ministry. But most of the time it's the student that you're like, there's no way this kid's going to get saved, but has so much influence. And like God like sees something in them, and I watch their heart get transformed. And that kid has a way stronger why than a lot of other students who maybe have known Jesus their whole life. I'm not like, I want to be careful because people who are so faithful to God and like are great leaders, that's awesome. But I'm saying, I just don't want to limit who God could use in your ministry. And I think there are probably a lot of students that God could use that maybe you don't think they could.
I mean, I'm just sitting in small group with my group. I'm with our, some of our senior guys. And we had this kid that I baptized like 3 weeks ago who he's like, hey, I want you to baptize me. He came up to me in one of our summer events. And he says, but I just want you to know my parents do not want me to do this. And he just came from a really anti-religious home, and his mom, kind of had some connections with some, a very, very toxic culture. And I got to know her story and was heartbroken by it. But the way that this student was talking to the other kids in our group on this, just a few days ago, because another student opened up just sharing like, hey, I just got some doubts about just like faith, and I'm just kind of skeptical in general. He's not following Christ yet. But then the student that just recently got baptized, this is only 3 weeks ago, he just was like, guys, like, I started coming here. I thought all this was crazy. I thought the worship was weird. My girlfriend would just brought me, and I just like, I've always thought like super skeptical of like God in general. But I just started reading the Bible and like reading the Gospels, and like Jesus was just so real to me. And I just prayed in one of the services, and like that's when I gave my life to Jesus, and I got baptized that next week. And he was just like flat out like so passionate, and I was just so inspired. I mean, or I think about your camera guy Sean. I'm gonna guess that Sean is probably is going to be a heck of a lot more of a bold evangelist because he's experienced the transformation of Christ in his life. Then, and like you say, you got to be careful. We're not trying to discredit. It's like the son that never left home. It's like, and that's kind of my story. I'm a church kid. I grew up in it. I've always known about Jesus my whole life and have my own story in that. But, like how do we take both of those camps of the people who are so fresh but just don't have the foundation, like raw material, but also those students who are faithful and have been at everything, but have maybe lost that passion or maybe taken the gospel for granted. Like those are the questions that I'm currently wrestling with. So would love to hear your thoughts on how do we take both of these camps and help inspire and equip and train and mobilize them to go be the evangelists in the community that we can't be on a school campus.
Oh, man. Well, you think about, so what you just said, like you get the students in your ministry who have never known anything else. Maybe they have a great family, great loving, supportive family and stuff like that. If you're able to get them to partner with and become friends with the student who has a totally different life experience, that friendship will want to be the most beneficial for both of them, for them to learn from each other. Because as the kid who had the hard childhood and, grew up with addicts and stuff, one of my favorite things was developing a friendship with my friend John, who his dad was the pastor at the church when I grew up there and stuff. And he's a pastor actually out in Kansas, not Kansas City, but he's out in Wichita. But man, like me being able to learn from him and realize that there's so many things that about discipleship that I could learn from him, because he knew so, like, our friendship was so important to me, in that. And so I think that's a really cool way that you can bridge that gap for both of those students who don't know how they could use them. And so I think overall, I think the thing that I try to think about is, do you golf, Ryan?
A little.
Okay.
Not as much as I should.
Okay. Same. So you're probably just like me.
I enjoy it.
Okay. I think what keeps me golfing is I'll have one good shot over the course of 18 holes. I will hate golfing for 3 hours.
And then you're like, I'm going pro. The perfect.
There's the one shot. There's no way I can do this. It rolls perfectly. I'm putting for a birdie. Of course I don't make it, but like I'm still putting for it. And there's that one shot. And it's like, if I can just get that one shot, it'll keep me in it. And what I've seen with students is like, if they can just get a taste of it, it'll change them forever. I think that, we have these camp mountain high experiences where I think are important, but I think sometimes we put too much emphasis on those. Whereas I think the real things that make like laborers who want to like give up things to pursue Jesus and to disciple their friends and to reach people around the world is if they just get a taste of it. Like we had a girl, my wife is a sophomore girls leader, and one of her students invited her friends to come to church. They have a bunch of stuff going on in their lives, and invites them to come to church. They encounter Jesus and they get baptized at Easter. And it's me and one of my wife's students, who's a sophomore, were baptizing her friends.
Yeah.
Watching her light up when they get out of the water and she hugs them. There's no training. There's no like vision casting. Nothing can replace that, of them getting a taste of being able to experience them partnering with God and getting a front row seat to life change.
Mm.
And so however we can model our ministry, so that's the taste that students are getting. You're not just instructing them, they're experiencing it.
Yeah.
And so I think that, again, that's easy to say, but I believe that there are tangible ways that we can invite students into that. And it's in simple ways, like they invite a friend, that friend is asking for a prayer request at the end of groups. Hey, have their friend pray for him. Right? Like, anyways, so I think if you get a taste of it, that's what has kept me in golf. I'm not good at golfing, but man, I get that one shot and I'm like, I'll do whatever it takes, And I think students are the same way.
Yeah. And I think it starts with your leaders too.
Totally.
I bring all of our leaders on and I try to communicate to them. I said, my goal is for you to baptize a kid, not like as quickly as possible in the sense of like, we're just going to like, they probably shouldn't, but let's do it anyway. Yeah. But, to say, I want to get this, the sooner you can lead a student to Christ yourself by sharing the gospel and be a part of that transformation and be a part of that, moment for them to declare their faith and their baptism. I was like that will change you forever. Of course it's changed. Of course the Lord's changing the student and from death to life, but it's like, man, that being a part of those things, to your point, will so foundationally change you as a person that, I don't think you can be a part of that kind of life change and not walk away inspired, and your vision expanded. Like, I've never thought it was possible for me to be a part of leading someone to Jesus, but now I've done it. And now I can't get enough of that. So I'm constantly looking and trying to think, man, how can we not just train students, but how can we really effectively mobilize them to that? So that's probably maybe we could do it. We could do a whole nother podcast. Maybe we should do that, on talking through, tools and how do we practically mobilize students there, to that. But I know we're running out of time together today.
Can I just add something, just a small tip?
Yeah, please.
Because you just made me think of, this is what I tell all of our student pastors when they're leading their leader huddles before Wednesday nights for groups, is it's an acronym ACE. So it's accountability, celebration, expectancy. And it's I want every leader that when they come, the accountability piece is, I want them to know that we know that they're missed. Or like, we have this line for our students, which is if you aren't missed, you aren't known. And so like that,
That's
and
really
that's
good.
part of our follow-up strategy. So if nothing changes, whether they come to group or not, why would they come? And so, but if they know that they're missed somewhere, then they know that they're known somewhere. And I think for our leaders, it's the same way. But I also want to build in this accountability piece to where what you do matters, and we hurt when you're not here. And so like it's really easy. Like you go around the circle and you're like, all right, so and so shot me a text and they're not going to be here. But it's like you get those flaky leaders. Hey, does anyone know where Billy is? I'm picking on Billy a lot, this metaphorical leader. But like, hey, do you guys know where Billy is? And it just shows like, oh, they actually notice I'm not here because like what I do matters. The celebration, the line, what gets celebrated gets repeated. And so it's celebrating those small wins. It's celebrating, man, I went to one of my students' games and I got to meet their parents. Now, I didn't know what was going on in their home life, but now I do. And I was able to develop this relationship with a parent that I think is going to transform my relationship with this kid. I want to celebrate those things. And it's also an opportunity for you as a leader to call out and celebrate the things you saw in your leaders. Hey, like, for example, because I was talking about that kid, Josh, that slapped Noah. Hey, man, he has a leader named Brandon who's a great leader. And Brandon is so great with Josh. He should get celebrated every single week for the stuff that he's pouring into this kid who really struggles in social settings. It's like, man, I want to celebrate him. And I want to invite leaders to also celebrate other leaders and to celebrate their students and what their students are doing. But it builds this culture of celebration. And then it's also, you're seeing that, like, again, what I do matters because this is the stuff that's happening. And the last one, expectancy. I think that the power of a Wednesday night is limited by the expectancy of the leaders. I really believe that. If all of our leaders go into a night and you're not saying, I believe students are going to get saved tonight. I believe that students are going to move from death to life tonight. I believe that tonight, and it could be that night, you're just talking about a story. You're talking about Daniel, right? Or something. No, you're vision casting like, hey, the reason we're talking about this is because I think students are being called to be different in our culture, just like Daniel. And I think this is important. You build this expectancy. I think that's our role as leaders, to build that expectancy. And it changes the way leaders show up in groups, is they know, like, I'm here and leading this group because life change is possible for these students. And so, yeah, accountability, celebration, expectancy. I think all of them are essential to building that kind of culture you're talking about for our leaders. Because I do think it starts with leaders.
That's amazing. I love that. I've never heard that before. So thank you for sharing that.
Take it.
Sean, I'm curious, something that maybe for anybody listening to this and for me, what do you feel like is something that God's been putting on your heart lately that you're saying, man, we can't miss this as student pastors. Like if we could focus on a million things, but we have to get this right.
There's a lot I want to say. Well, so okay, I'll try my best to get through this quickly. I have the privilege now of being the old guy in youth ministry, that I get, a lot of younger pastors message me on Instagram and stuff and asking me little questions here and there and stuff. I think the common theme I hear is just how much discouragement a lot of younger leaders, I think, have, because like you're saying, they can look on Instagram and see a million ministries that are crushing it. And it's, I'm so thankful that social media was kind of just getting started as I was getting into ministry. And so I was able to be formed in ministry before I had those things. But as you're being formed as a leader and looking, and the comparison is so real, which even saying comparison, people are already putting that away in their head because they think they don't struggle with that. Every single leader struggles with comparison and feeling like what they're doing isn't mattering. And I think, so the first one is just knowing that what you do matters. And there are wins happening in your ministry that might be small, but they're worth celebrating. And you need to give yourself permission to celebrate what you're doing well. And if you don't regularly do that, and if you don't have someone in your life that can do that with you, who's not in your ministry, who's not one of your leaders, I mean, like, you can hit me up on Instagram. I will be that person. I will gas you up. Okay. But like, you need someone outside that's encouraging you, because there are few jobs that are more discouraging than doing what we're doing. And if you want to last 17 years, you have to have people who are telling you that when you can't see it in yourself. The second thing is like we were saying, like what you do comes out of who you are. My first church I worked at, I got really burned out. I was psychologically unhealthy, physically. I mean, I put on like 30 pounds. Like, I mean, I was in the worst spot. And for probably 3 years, I blamed the church for burning me out. And I would have said that. And I've said this ad nauseum to friends. And I've said this on other podcasts and stuff a million times. But like, I had a guy tell me one time, he's a psychologist and a brilliant guy. And I was talking to him and he was talking about servant leadership and all this stuff. And I told him how burned out this church had made me. And he's like, that's so interesting you put it that way. You know, you're the only one responsible for burning yourself out. And I said, and I pushed back. I was like, you're wrong. And I talked about all of the things that they had made me do. And he goes, great. But they didn't make you start eating bad. They didn't make you stop having your devotional life. They didn't make you all these things that I had sacrificed because ministry needed to happen. But no one asked me to do those things. I'm responsible for the health of my faith. And I think that's something that's a hard pill to swallow, I think sometimes, especially when you're on the verge of burnout. This isn't a judgmental thing like, hey, get your life together, guy. No, I'm giving you permission to say no. If you find the health of your family is deteriorating, if your own health is deteriorating, you have to start saying no. And I heard Doug Fields, youth ministry legend, one time. I heard him. I think he shared this at a DYM thing where he said, when he talks to people, he asks them like, "What's the worst thing that could happen?" In this situation, and they're like, "Man, if I start saying no, like I could lose my job." And he just says, "That's not the worst thing that can happen. The worst thing that can happen is your kids growing up hating the church. The worst thing that could happen is your wife despises the church and feels like the church is your mistress." Like I think there's so many other things, and again, if you want to leave a lasting impact on a generation and you want to lead like the John 10:10 life of like Jesus saying like he came to give us life and give it to the full, he wasn't just talking about the students that we're ministering to. That's not just a preaching line for other people, that's for you too. And I think when you're stuck in ministry, I think we believe this lie that that's not possible because it's so stressful. There's so many hard conversations. And it's just like, if you're not experiencing the good life, not meaning you won't suffer. What I remind my team all the time is suffering is like the only topic that's mentioned in every book of the New Testament. I don't know if you knew that. There's not really any other topics that are mentioned that often. So you will suffer. But if you're not experiencing joy in moments, in between those moments of suffering, if you feel like you can't tell me when life will be normal again, like we say like, oh, it's just a hard season right now. If we can't put an end date to that hard season, that's not a season, that's your life. That'd be the most if you're feeling discouraged, find an encouraging friend. Justin is that guy for me. My friend Joel Firebaugh, he's at Crossroads in Ohio. He is, do you know Joel? Are you buddies with Joel?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We had, it's one of my favorite episodes I've done is with Joel.
Dude,
he has been such a great encouragement, even just like, cause we just connected to do this podcast. And then like, even just the relationships that, he's been following up with me and, at different times and, just people like that are just filled with joy. Are so dynamic. And those are life-changing. And those are just those little word here and there. Not people you have to talk to all the time, but just
totally. Dude, I love Joel. Joel is the most optimistic person in my life, hands down. And I'm naturally pessimistic. I would defend myself and say I'm a realist.
But yeah, really, that's because you read like Nietzsche books to go to bed.
Yeah,
you're like
a little bit. Well, I do love reading some Nietzsche.
What even is reality?
Yeah, but man, you need those people in your life, and there have been multiple times that I've called Joel and called Justin, just like, dude, I don't know what to do with this, and I need them to speak life into me. And I think the thing about it is they're not just saying things to make me feel better. They're telling me truth. They're showing me the pattern of how I show up. They're showing me the ways that like, hey, no, they're pointing to my character, not just trying to say like, no, you're doing a great job. They're talking in specifics. And I think that changes everything. But man, that's the biggest thing. And I know this is such a cop out because I'm sure young leaders hear this all the time, but who you're becoming matters more than what you're doing. And the reality is, if you don't think about every single thing that you do, every habit that you form is forming who you are as a follower of Jesus. And if you don't like your current structure of your life, you're not going to like who you're becoming. And so you can only change that now. And that's a hard look in the mirror and having that hard conversation. And that's a regular thing you have to do. There's still times where my wife has to come to me and just say, hey, you're coming home way too exhausted. And like, I don't want just the leftovers of you. Like I want my husband. It's like, okay, how can I reframe my life to where I'm coming home more energized, you know? So anyways, yeah. I'm preaching to myself here, but that's what I would say.
Yeah. Sean, this was great. Thank you so much for this. So much good stuff that we got into. And I know we took the conversation maybe a different direction than we'd planned with some questions and things, but I'm just really grateful for, one, your heart, mm-hmm. two, encourage other leaders, two, just to share your wisdom and your experience. But more than anything, just the encouragement that you want to be to other leaders. So coming out of this, if listeners want to stay in contact with you, what's the best way to do that? And
message
get
on
connected
Instagram
with you, and just look you up on Instagram.
Sean C. Lord.
That's it.
Hit me up. I know I don't post a lot, but I promise I'm on it. And so hit me up. Honestly, like that's my favorite thing I get to do is connect with youth pastors around the country. And also, Ryan, I think you're awesome, dude. I think you're a killer.
Thanks, bro.
And I'm very excited that leaders like you have a lot of entrepreneurial qualities to you that I think you naturally have. And I'm thankful that you're in youth ministry and being able to use those gifts for the kingdom. And so just really appreciate you, man.
Of course. Well, that's why I'm doing this, is to be a resource and encouragement and to help share conversations and come alongside and, get under the hood of ministry and get into what's going on for where that makes sense with people. So
for sure,
there's no greater cause, there's no greater mission than what we get to do and get to be a part of. And I think student ministry is the most important thing on the planet that we can be doing. So
agreed.
Yeah, it's a joy. But Sean, thank you so much. And we'll catch you soon.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening and watching this episode. If it was a blessing to you, my ask is that you would share this content with a friend, someone else in leadership and in ministry. I hope it was a blessing to you, and I hope that God blesses your ministry moving forward.